The smell of burnt coffee and fried onions clung to Nina's uniform as she wiped down the last table of the night. Her arms ached, her lower back throbbed, and her eyes burned from exhaustion, but it didn't matter. The shift was almost over. Soon, she'd be home, slipping into bed next to her little girl, feeling the weight of the day dissolve in the soft rhythm of Iris's breathing. That thought alone was enough to keep her moving. She tossed her rag into the bucket and pulled her phone from her apron pocket, checking the time. A few more minutes and she'd be out the door. A notification popped up on her screen. Motion detected, front door. Her stomach did a slow, uneasy turn. She clicked the alert, expecting to see Jade, her best friend, who sometimes spent the night when Nina worked late. But the screen filled with an image that didn't make sense. Nina stared, frozen. The camera showed someone stepping into her house, closing the door softly behind them, moving with the ease of someone who belonged there. She recognized the posture, the way the person tossed their keys onto the small wooden dish by the door. The coat, the bag slung over the shoulder, even the way she reached up to smooth her hair, it was all unmistakable. It was her. Nina felt a sharp pulse of panic. She was here, at work, watching herself walk into her own home. Her fingers clenched around her phone, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. The footage continued. The woman walked down the short hallway, flicking off the kitchen light as she passed. Then she disappeared into Iris's room. Nina's heart pounded so loudly she barely heard the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Her vision blurred, her hands slick with sweat as she pressed the volume button, listening for sound. Muffled rustling, a soft whisper, the creak of the mattress shifting. Then, Iris's sleepy, drowsy little giggle. The woman leaned over her daughter's bed. Nina saw her own face, peaceful, familiar, pressing a gentle kiss to Iris's forehead. Iris nestled into her pillow, sighing contentedly. Nina lurched upright so fast that her chair screeched against the floor. She grabbed her coat, nearly knocking over a stack of menus on the counter. Her co-worker, Ralph, glanced at her, brows raised. "You good?" No, she was not good. She fumbled with her phone, dialing Jade as she pushed through the diner doors and into the crisp night air. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. Her stomach twisted as she ran toward the bus stop, chest heaving, legs moving before her mind could catch up. 1,000 questions battered against her skull. Had someone broken in? If so, why did they look exactly like her? Had she lost her mind? The bus was taking too long. She turned on her heel and sprinted toward the nearest intersection, waving desperately at a passing taxi. The driver barely glanced at her before rolling past, uninterested in picking up someone wearing a stained uniform and sneakers with holes in the sides. She cursed under her breath and kept running. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, but she didn't stop. She needed to get home. She needed to see Iris. The streets blurred past her, closed shops, dim streetlights, the occasional flicker of a TV through an apartment window. By the time she reached her block, her pulse was a hammer against her ribs. Her house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, small but warm, with a tiny front porch and a stubborn mailbox that refused to close properly. It looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Nothing out of place. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But she knew what she saw. She took the porch steps 2 at a time, gripping her keys so tightly they dug into her palm. She hesitated only for a second before unlocking the door, shoving it open, and stepping inside. Silence. The air smelled like fabric softener and faint traces of vanilla from the candle she'd blown out before leaving. Everything was exactly as it should be: the couch, the shoes by the door, the unopened stack of mail on the entry table. Her gaze snapped to the wooden dish where she always placed her keys. They were still there, sitting neatly in their usual spot. The exact motion she had watched through the security feed. Her hands trembled as she crept down the hall, pushing Iris's bedroom door open inch by inch. Moonlight spilled across the small bed, illuminating Iris's face, relaxed and peaceful in sleep. Her stuffed bunny was tucked under one arm, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. Nina's knees nearly buckled with relief. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that would explain what she had seen. She pressed her hand against Iris's forehead, feeling her warm skin, grounding herself in reality. Iris stirred slightly but didn't wake. She stepped back, glancing toward her own bedroom door. She hadn't checked it yet. With slow, deliberate steps, she crossed the hallway, gripping the doorknob. She pushed it open. Empty. Her bed was unmade, the same way she'd left it. The sweater she'd debated wearing that morning was still draped over the chair. The water glass on her nightstand, untouched. She backed away, her breath coming in uneven gasps. She checked the camera footage again. The log showed only one entry. Her arrival, just now. The video was gone. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled back, refreshing, checking different angles. Nothing. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Her legs felt unsteady as she lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. She had seen it. She knew she had. But there was nothing there now. Her phone buzzed in her lap, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. She glanced at the screen. Jade. She exhaled sharply, answering in a whisper. Jade. Oh my God, you have to. Jade's voice was thick with sleep. Nina. What's wrong? Nina's mouth opened, but the words caught in her throat. She turned to look at the bedroom door, at the hallway bathed in soft shadows. She swallowed hard. I thought I saw something on the cameras. Jade yawned. Oh, Han, you're exhausted. Your brain's playing tricks on you. Nina wanted to argue, wanted to explain every impossible detail, but what could she even say? Maybe Jade was right. Maybe exhaustion was messing with her mind. Still, as she hung up the phone and crawled into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here. And worse, whoever it was, they had kissed her daughter goodnight. Nina shoved the door open so hard it bounced off the wall with a dull thud. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as she scanned the living room. The couch, the coffee table, the framed pictures of Iris's drawings on the wall, everything looked exactly the same as when she'd left. The air was still, carrying only the soft scent of lavender laundry detergent and the faint traces of the vanilla candle she'd blown out before work. Her grip tightened on her phone as she forced herself forward, her sneakers silent against the hardwood floor. She barely noticed the way her hands trembled as she turned the corner toward Iris's room. Her pulse pounded in her ears, each beat louder than the last. Iris was curled up under her favorite pink blanket, one arm wrapped around her stuffed bunny. Her tiny lips were slightly parted, lost in the deep, dreamless sleep of children who knew nothing of fear. Nina hovered over the bed, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Her shoulders sagged with relief. The woman, the thing, had touched her, kissed her goodnight. Nina had seen it. But Iris didn't seem disturbed, didn't even stir at her presence. She smoothed Iris's curls away from her forehead, pressing her palm gently against the warm skin. No fever. No signs that anything had happened at all. But Nina knew better. Backing away from the bed, she reached for her phone, fingers fumbling over the screen. The security app was still open. The footage had to be there. She tapped the playback button, expecting to see what she had watched earlier at the diner, the imposter stepping into the house, moving like she belonged. The video loaded. She scanned through the timeline, scrolling back to the notification that had nearly stopped her heart. Nothing. The log showed only one recorded entry. Hers. Just now. Nina's stomach lurched. She scrolled back further, checking the previous hours. No movement detected. No unexplained visitors. Nothing except what the camera had recorded earlier that day: Iris running in circles before school, Jade picking her up in the afternoon, Nina leaving for work. It was as if the footage had never existed. She swallowed the thick lump in her throat and forced herself to check every camera angle, every possible view, but the result was always the same. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. The footage had been there. She had seen it. But now it was gone. She stumbled back into the living room, flipping on every light as she moved. The house felt too quiet, too still. She checked the kitchen, opening cabinets, peering into the pantry, even yanking open the fridge as if the intruder, her, could be hiding there. The hallway closet was next. Shoes and jackets lined the shelves, exactly as she had left them. The bathroom, too, was undisturbed, her toothbrush still in its cup, the towel still slung over the rack from her morning shower. She pushed open her own bedroom door and hesitated. The air felt thick here, charged with something invisible but heavy. Her stomach twisted. She forced herself forward. The bed was unmade, the blankets tangled from the night before. A pair of Iris's socks peeked out from under the dresser, a casualty of her habit of kicking them off wherever she pleased. The sweater Nina had considered wearing earlier still draped over the chair. Nothing was out of place. Except it was. She could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against her back, raising goosebumps along her arms. She turned toward the mirror over her dresser, half expecting to see something unnatural staring back at her. But it was just her own reflection, wide-eyed, pale, lips slightly parted. She braced herself against the dresser, gripping the edge so hard her knuckles turned white. The woman in the security footage had looked exactly like this. Same face, same body, same everything. She squeezed her eyes shut. Maybe Jade was right. Maybe she was exhausted. Maybe her brain was playing tricks on her, twisting shadows and exhaustion into something that didn't exist. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself, the image of the woman kissing Iris's forehead was burned into her memory, clear and undeniable. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to release the dresser, to unclench her jaw. The house was safe. Iris was safe. She needed to sleep. Her fingers hovered over her phone, ready to call Jade, but she hesitated. What was she going to say? That she had watched a security video of herself walking into her own house and tucking her daughter into bed? That she had seen it with her own eyes and then watched it vanish into thin air? She pressed the call button before she could overthink it. Jade answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. Nina? What time is it? Nina's throat felt tight, like she had to force the words out. I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind. There was a pause, then the rustle of sheets. That's a big ascat. Jesus, Nina, it's past 2. I don't care, she whispered. I saw something. On the cameras. Jade yawned. What, like someone breaking in? Nina swallowed. I saw myself. There was a beat of silence. Jade sighed. Okay, so, explain that again, but in a way that doesn't sound like you need a psych evaluation. Nina pressed a hand against her temple, trying to make sense of it all. I was at work. I got a notification from the security camera. I watched it live. A woman walked into my house. She went into Iris's room. She kissed her goodnight. She paused, gripping the phone tighter. It was me. Jade was quiet for a moment, long enough that Nina thought she'd hung up. Then she sighed again, heavier this time. Babe, you've been running yourself into the ground for months. You barely sleep, you work 2 jobs, you take care of Iris by yourself. Your brain is fried. Maybe you dreamed it. Nina shook her head even though Jade couldn't see. I didn't. I checked the footage. It was there. And then it wasn't. Jade made a soft, sympathetic noise. You need rest. That's it. Just sleep, and I promise, this will make sense in the morning. Nina wanted to believe her. She really did. She muttered a weak goodnight and ended the call. The silence in the house pressed in again, heavier than before. She climbed into bed, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. Iris was fine. There were no signs of a break-in. The footage didn't exist anymore. But that didn't change the fact that she had seen it. And no matter how much she tried to push it away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Nina pulled Iris's jacket tighter around her small shoulders, kneeling to zip it up properly. The school parking lot was a mess of honking cars and half-awake parents, the early morning air still crisp with leftover traces of winter. Iris was chattering about an art project, something about glitter and a princess castle, but Nina's mind felt disconnected from the moment, hovering somewhere between exhaustion and unease. You'll come pick me up, right? Iris asked, tilting her head. Nina forced a smile, smoothing down her daughter's curls. Of course, baby. Always. Iris grinned, then skipped toward the entrance, her pink backpack bouncing with each step. Nina watched her disappear inside, her heart giving the familiar squeeze it always did when they were apart. She climbed back into her car, rubbing her hands together to chase away the cold. She barely remembered driving to the hotel, her mind circling the night before like a vulture. The missing security footage. The untouched house that somehow felt wrong. The way her own reflection had stared back at her with something unreadable behind its eyes. The hotel lobby smelled like citrus and overused cologne, the kind designed to convince people they were somewhere expensive even when they weren't. Nina clocked in, tied her apron, and grabbed her cleaning cart. Routine. That's what she needed. A normal, boring day where nothing unexpected happened. She moved through the rooms, changing sheets, scrubbing sinks, vacuuming carpets where strangers had left pieces of their lives behind, crumbs, receipts, strands of hair clinging to the pillowcases. She went through the motions, trying to let the predictability soothe her. But the feeling crept in slowly, like a chill slipping under the door. The sense that she wasn't alone. She wiped down a mirror in room 214, catching a flicker of movement behind her in the glass. She spun around, heart lurching, but the room was empty. The curtains shifted slightly, as if someone had just passed by, but the windows were shut. She swallowed, turning back to the mirror, forcing herself to breathe. It was nothing. A trick of the light. A cart rolled by in the hallway, its wheels squeaking against the tile. Nina stepped out, blinking at the brightness of the overhead fluorescents. Hey, you good? Bianca, one of the other housekeepers, stood there with a stack of fresh towels. She was chewing gum, eyes sharp with curiosity. Nina forced a nod. Yeah. Did you see someone in there? Bianca frowned. In where? The room. Just now. Bianca leaned to glance inside, then gave Nina a look. Girl, the only thing in there is a half-eaten room service tray and a bed that needs making. You sure you're okay? Nina let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. Yeah. Just tired. Bianca gave her a lingering glance, like she wasn't entirely convinced, but shrugged and walked off. Nina gripped the handle of her cleaning cart, knuckles white. She needed sleep. Real sleep. Not the tossing, turning kind where her own memories felt unreliable. By the time she finished her shift, her nerves were raw. She picked up Iris, listened to her excited rambling about a classmate's pet turtle, made dinner, helped with homework. Normal things. A normal night. But the house still felt wrong. She went to the sink to wash the dishes and stopped cold. A cup of tea sat on the counter. Steam curled from the surface, soft and delicate, as if it had just been poured. Nina's breath hitched. She hadn't made tea. She would have heard the kettle. She would have felt the warmth of the mug in her own hands. She stepped closer, the weight of the moment pressing down on her lungs. The cup was hers, part of the mismatched set she'd bought years ago at a thrift store. It sat perfectly in place, waiting. Her fingers hovered over the handle. It was still warm. Iris's voice floated in from the living room. "Mommy?" Nina jerked her hand back as if burned, spinning toward the doorway. "Yeah, baby?" Iris's head peeked around the corner. "Can we watch a movie?" Nina swallowed, forcing her expression into something neutral. "Of course." She glanced at the tea one last time before shutting off the kitchen light. Later, after Iris had fallen asleep on the couch, Nina carried her to bed, tucking the blankets around her small frame. She lingered in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing. She wanted to believe she was imagining things. That exhaustion had finally tipped her over into paranoia. But she wasn't imagining it. And it wasn't over. She turned toward the bathroom, flipping the light switch. The brightness was too harsh, casting sharp shadows against the walls. She braced her hands against the sink, staring down at the drain, willing herself to calm down. When she finally lifted her head, she almost convinced herself to look away. But she didn't. And that was her mistake. Her reflection was staring at her, but something was wrong. The eyes looking back at her weren't blank with fatigue or narrowed in thought. They were smiling. Nina's stomach turned to ice. Her lips weren't moving, but the reflections were. A slow, creeping grin stretched across its face. She staggered back, her hand fumbling for the doorknob. Her reflection didn't mimic the movement. It just stood there, smiling. Her throat closed up, her breath coming in sharp, broken gasps. The reflection blinked. Nina turned and ran. Nina sat cross-legged on the living room couch, her back stiff, her hands gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles ached. The screen cast a dim glow against her face, illuminating the deep lines of exhaustion carved under her eyes. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It hadn't felt empty in days. Her fingers hovered over the screen, the security app open, 2 camera feeds watching the house like a second set of eyes. The original camera near the front door still showed nothing but the undisturbed entryway, her keys sitting exactly where she had left them, the soft glow of the hallway light spilling across the floor. The new camera, installed that afternoon, watched the hallway outside Iris's room. She had mounted it high in the shadows, where it wouldn't be noticed. Not that she knew if noticing even mattered. What good was any of this if the footage kept disappearing? Nina swiped through the app settings again, double-checking that the recordings were set to save automatically, that no one else had access to the account. There was no logical explanation for what had happened last time. She had seen the footage with her own eyes. And then it was gone. Her gaze flicked toward Iris's closed bedroom door. Her daughter was asleep, tucked in with her stuffed bunny, her nightlight casting its usual warm glow. Safe. At least, she had to believe that. Nina glanced at the time. Nearly midnight. She hadn't blinked in what felt like hours, every muscle in her body wound tight with anticipation. If it happened again, she would see it. She wouldn't just watch helplessly this time. The phone vibrated in her hand. Motion detected, hallway. A sharp wave of nausea twisted in her stomach. Her pulse roared in her ears as she tapped the notification with a shaking finger. The hallway feed snapped into focus. There she was. Walking through the front door. Nina's lungs squeezed so tight she couldn't breathe. The imposter moved with unsettling ease, mimicking every small habit Nina had developed over the years, the way she absent-mindedly brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she glanced toward the kitchen as if checking for a mess, the way she set her keys in the dish without looking. It was her, down to the smallest detail. The woman moved toward the hallway, her steps light, almost too smooth. Nina's breath came in quick, shallow bursts as she watched the imposter pass the bathroom mirror. For a fraction of a second, the reflection didn't move. Nina's stomach dropped. Iris's bedroom door creaked open. A sleepy giggle filled the air. "Mommy?" Nina's entire body locked up. The woman stepped inside, her voice soft, gentle, dripping with warmth. "I'm here, baby." Nina's chest constricted so violently she thought she might throw up. The voice was perfect, an exact replica of her own. A lullaby drifted from the room, the melody threading through the house like something out of a dream. Nina's hands went numb. Her mother's song. The one she hadn't sung since she was a child. The one Iris had never even heard. Her vision blurred, her throat tightening as she struggled to process what she was seeing. And then something inside her snapped. She launched off the couch, her phone slipping from her grip and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her legs moved on instinct, her bare feet barely making a sound as she sprinted down the hallway. Iris's door flew open so hard it slammed against the wall. The room was empty. Nina's heart pounded against her ribs, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She spun in place, eyes darting wildly across the room. Nothing. Iris lay curled beneath her blankets, one hand gripping her stuffed bunny, her chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. Nina staggered back, her skin cold, her limbs unsteady. The hallway was empty. The house was silent. She scrambled to grab her phone from the floor, her fingers trembling as she reopened the security app. The video was gone. The log showed no motion detected. No entries. No signs of anything except her own frantic footsteps just now. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She stared at the screen, willing the footage to reappear, willing anything to make sense. But there was nothing. A cold wave of rage surged through her. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking onto her own reflection in the bathroom mirror at the end of the hallway. The anger burned through the fear like dry kindling. Something was in her house. Something was playing with her, creeping into her daughter's room, whispering lullabies from a childhood Nina barely even remembered. She clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't stress. This was real. And she wasn't going to just sit there and let it happen again. Nina turned on her heel, storming into the living room. She yanked open the cabinet near the bookshelf, grabbing the baseball bat she had kept since she moved in. It had been meant for security, just in case of break-ins. She had never once needed it. Until now. She sat back down on the couch, gripping the bat across her lap, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. She wouldn't sleep. She wouldn't blink. She wouldn't let that thing touch Iris again. Next time, she would be ready. Next time, she wouldn't just watch. She would catch her. Nina sat in the dark, gripping the baseball bat so tightly that her fingers ached. Her knuckles had turned white, her breathing shallow and controlled. The house was still, unnervingly so, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like it was waiting for something. The digital clock on the coffee table glowed 1:47 a.m. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft creak of the house settling. But every noise, every distant groan of the pipes, sent a fresh wave of tension crawling up her spine. She had been waiting for hours, barely blinking, her eyes glued to the security feeds on her phone. The front door camera showed the same untouched scene, keys in the dish, Iris's shoes by the door, the lamp still on. The hidden hallway camera outside Iris's room remained frozen in eerie stillness. Nothing moved. But Nina knew better now. She'd seen what the cameras could do, how they could lie, how they could erase something that should never have been there in the first place. Her head ached from exhaustion, her limbs heavy, but she refused to let her body give in. She couldn't. She had made a promise to herself that she wouldn't blink, wouldn't close her eyes for even a second. Because if she did, she knew what would happen. The imposter would come again. She shifted her grip on the bat, her fingers raw from holding it for so long. 1:58 a.m. The weight in her chest pressed deeper, her heartbeat a slow, steady drum of anticipation. She could feel it. The air was shifting. It was almost time. 2:03 a.m. Then she heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Nina stiffened, her grip tightening so fast that pain shot up her arms. The sound came from Iris's room. Not a random creak of the floorboards. Not the soft stir of a child shifting in her sleep. These were distinct, human steps. Slow. Measured. Nina's breath hitched. She shot to her feet, her body moving before her brain could catch up. The bat felt solid in her hands, a piece of reality she clung to as she darted across the living room. Her pulse roared in her ears as she reached Iris's door. Her fingers curled around the doorknob, twisting with force. She shoved the door open and swung. The bat sliced through the air with a sharp whoosh, but hit nothing. The force of her swing threw her off balance, and she stumbled forward, nearly crashing into Iris's dresser. Nina's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. Her heart hammered, every cell in her body screaming at her to run, to move, to fight. Then she saw her. The woman stood at the foot of Iris's bed. Nina's stomach lurched. She had braced herself for an intruder, a stranger, something she could explain. But this was worse. Because it wasn't just someone who looked like her. It was her. The same face. The same expression. The same slight tilt of the head, the same posture, the same shadow of exhaustion in her eyes. Nina's throat went dry. The imposter didn't move. She just stood there, staring. Nina's hands trembled as she adjusted her grip on the bat. Her mind screamed at her to run, to do something, but she was frozen. Then, slowly, the imposter smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Nina's entire body went cold. "You need to stop fighting this," the woman said. Nina sucked in a sharp breath. It wasn't just the way she spoke. It was her voice. Exactly her voice. Nina lunged, swinging the bat with every ounce of force she could summon. The bat passed straight through her. Nina stumbled, her knees slamming into the edge of the bed frame, sending a jolt of pain up her leg. She gasped for air, her brain scrambling to process what just happened. The imposter stood exactly where she had been, calm, unbothered, as if nothing had happened at all. Nina's vision blurred, panic clawing at her throat. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the light switch. Her fingers slammed against the wall, pressing it so hard she nearly cracked the plastic. The bulb flickered. Then the room flooded with light. Nina's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow gasps. She blinked. The woman was gone. The space where she had stood was empty. Nina's stomach twisted violently. She turned in place, heart slamming against her ribs. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Like she had never been there at all. A soft rustle of sheets. Nina's head snapped toward the bed. Iris stirred, shifting under the covers, her tiny face scrunching up in drowsy confusion. Nina's entire body locked up. Iris rubbed her eyes, her voice thick with sleep. "Mommy?" Nina forced herself to breathe, her pulse pounding in her ears. She swallowed hard, pushing the fear from her voice. "Go back to sleep, baby." Iris frowned. Then she blinked up at her with a look so innocent, so casual, that it made Nina's blood run cold. "Why are there two of you?" Nina's stomach plummeted. The bat slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her vision swam. Her breath caught in her throat, stuck there, trapped in the impossible reality of what she had just heard. Iris blinked at her again, then yawned, rolling over and burying her face into her stuffed bunny, already drifting back to sleep. Nina's entire body was shaking. Iris had seen her. Not her. The other one. Her blood turned to ice. Nina sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old shoebox in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the lid, hesitant, as if opening it would somehow change everything, as if the past was something she could keep tucked away like forgotten birthday cards and mismatched socks. But she had run out of choices. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant creaks of settling wood. Iris was asleep again, curled under her blanket, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside her mother's head. Nina should have been relieved, should have felt some small comfort in knowing her daughter was safe. But there was no relief. Not after what had happened tonight. She had seen her again. And this time, Iris had seen her too. Nina's hands trembled as she reached for the shoebox, sliding off the lid and pushing aside old receipts, concert tickets, love notes from a past life. She had stuffed this box with all the remnants of a time before everything had unraveled, photographs, little pieces of childhood, proof that she had existed, that her mother had been real, that her life had been ordinary once. She shuffled through the stack, her breath hitching as she pulled out a faded Polaroid. A park. Late afternoon. The kind of soft golden light that made everything look warmer than it really was. Her mother stood in the center of the frame, wearing a loose white dress, her hair caught mid-motion by the wind. She looked younger than Nina remembered, freer, smiling in a way that didn't seem forced. But that wasn't what made Nina's stomach drop. It was the two little girls standing on either side of her, each holding one of her mother's hands. Two identical girls. Nina's chest tightened, her vision narrowing in on the image. One of them was her. She recognized the gap in her front teeth, the way her hair curled slightly at the ends. But the other girl. She didn't know her. She should know her. But she didn't. Her hands shook as she flipped the photo over. Nothing. No names, no date, no note scribbled in her mother's familiar cursive. Nina's breath came in short, shallow gasps. This wasn't possible. She would have remembered having a sister. Wouldn't she? She scrambled through the rest of the photos, searching for another image, something that made sense. But every picture she found was wrong, because in all of them, there were two of her. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She needed answers. Her phone sat next to the shoebox, the screen dark, waiting. She reached for it, her fingers numb as she scrolled through her contacts, stopping on a name she hadn't called in years. Dad. Her stomach twisted as she stared at it. Their last conversation had been stiff, awkward. It had ended with an argument, the way most of their interactions did. He had never been an easy man, never one for affection or soft words. After her mother died, he had buried himself in work, in silence, in the kind of grief that made him distant. By the time Nina was old enough to understand what loss was, she realized that she had lost both of her parents that day. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. But he was the only one left who might know the truth. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. Then she pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. A click. Silence. Then, a voice, rough, aged, like gravel underfoot. Nina. She exhaled, trying to steady herself. Dad. There was a pause, the kind that stretched too long, the kind that made it clear he wasn't sure if he was happy to hear from her. Then, wary. What is it? She swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the photo, the paper bending slightly between her hands. I need to ask you something, she said, voice tight. Another pause. What? She forced the words out. Did I have a twin? A sharp inhale. The kind of sound people make when they've been caught. Nina's grip on the phone tightened. She could hear his breathing on the other end, heavy, uneven. The silence stretched. Too long. Too telling. Finally, his voice came, hoarse and unfamiliar. Where did you hear that? She clenched her jaw. I didn't hear it. I found a picture. A picture of her. A longer pause this time. She could almost hear the shift in his breathing, the weight of something pressing down on him. You were never supposed to find out, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Nina felt the air leave her lungs. Her entire body went still. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to stay calm, but her mind was already spinning, already running through the endless possibilities, the lies. Then tell me, she said, barely recognizing her own voice. Tell me who she was. Her father exhaled slowly, the sound long and tired. It doesn't matter, he said. Nina slammed her hand against the table, the force rattling the mug beside her. It does matter. She could hear the weariness in his tone, the finality. Nina, listen to me. No, she cut him off. You listen to me. I just watched my daughter ask me why there were two of me. I watched a woman who looks exactly like me walk through my house. And now I'm looking at a picture that tells me I had a twin I don't remember. And you're telling me it doesn't matter? Her voice cracked on the last word, her breathing uneven. Her father sighed. It's better this way. Her fingers curled into a fist. Better for who? Silence. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Dad. Still nothing. Dad. Finally, his voice, low and resigned. It's done, Nina. Let it go. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Let it go? How am I supposed to let it go when? It's over, he said, cutting her off. You're alive. That's all that matters. Nina froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a cold wave of nausea rolling through her. I'm alive, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. His breath hitched. She could feel the weight of the silence that followed. Then, softer this time, like an admission. You were never supposed to find out. And then the line went dead. Nina sat there, phone still pressed to her ear, the dull tone ringing endlessly on the other end. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the phone onto the table. Her stomach twisted. Something had been erased. And she was going to find out why. Nina was running. She didn't know where she was or what she was running from, only that the darkness around her was thick, endless. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, her feet pounding against the unseen ground beneath her. There were no walls, no horizon, just a vast nothingness stretching forever in all directions. Then, suddenly, she wasn't alone. A figure stood ahead, barely visible in the darkness, but Nina knew. She didn't need to see the face to recognize the presence. The woman stepped forward, the dim light catching the curve of her jaw, the strands of dark hair hanging loosely around her face. Nina's chest tightened. It was her. The same face. The same eyes. But there was something wrong, something off. The woman was smiling, but there was no warmth in it. Nina tried to speak, but her throat closed up, her voice swallowed by the darkness. The woman leaned in, her voice a whisper, so close it sent a shiver down Nina's spine. "You forgot my life." The words were slow, deliberate. "Now I'm taking it back." Nina's scream tore through the silence as she jolted awake, her body tangled in the sheets, drenched in sweat. Her heart pounded violently, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The bedroom was dark, but not like the dream. This was real, this was her house, this was now. She pressed a shaking hand to her chest, trying to ground herself. But the words echoed in her skull, circling, growing louder. "You forgot my life." She shoved back the covers, her body still trembling as she stumbled out of bed. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet, but she barely felt it. She moved on instinct, barely registering the act of grabbing a sweater, barely thinking about how she ended up outside, standing on the sidewalk in the dead of night, staring at the house across the street. Mrs. Langford. She had lived in this neighborhood longer than anyone. She had known Nina's mother. If anyone had answers, it was her. Nina crossed the street quickly, her breath still uneven, the weight of the nightmare clinging to her like damp clothes. She knocked once, twice, and then again, harder, her desperation outweighing the guilt of waking up an elderly woman at. She glanced at her phone, for 12 a.m. For a long moment, nothing. Then the porch light flickered on. A shadow passed behind the frosted glass of the door, and finally, it creaked open. Mrs. Langford squinted at her, wrapped in a thick robe, her hair flattened on one side from sleep. "Nina?" Her voice was groggy, but there was concern beneath it. "Are you all right?" Nina swallowed, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. "I need to ask you something. Please." Mrs. Langford studied her for a moment, then sighed, pushing the door open wider. "Come in, dear." The house smelled like old books and lavender, the same way it always had. Nina followed the older woman into the kitchen, where Mrs. Langford switched on the small lamp above the sink, casting a warm glow over the cluttered counter. Mrs. Langford gestured for her to sit, then took a seat across from her, rubbing her eyes. "All right, what's got you knocking on my door before sunrise?" Nina's throat felt tight. The words didn't want to come out, but she forced them. "Did I have a twin?" Mrs. Langford stilled. Her hands, which had been reaching for her teacup, froze midair. She didn't breathe. Didn't blink. Nina felt her stomach clench. "Mrs. Langford?" The older woman's hands trembled slightly as she set the cup down. "Who told you that?" Nina exhaled shakily. "No one. I found a picture. And then I called my father, but he wouldn't tell me anything. He just said I was never supposed to find out." Mrs. Langford pressed her lips together, the color draining from her face. Nina leaned forward. "Please. I need to know." For a long moment, the older woman simply stared at the table, as if weighing something heavy in her mind. Then, finally, she let out a slow breath. "Yes, Nina," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You had a twin." Nina's breath hitched. She had known it, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Langford's gaze was distant, as if she were seeing something from long ago. Her name was Elise. The name felt foreign and familiar all at once, like a word she had almost remembered but had lost just before it came to her lips. Nina's fingers curled against her knees. What happened to her? Mrs. Langford closed her eyes, shaking her head as if she were trying to push away the memory. "There was an accident," she said finally, voice thick with something old and painful. "You were both just little girls. Maybe 5. Maybe 6. It was," she trailed off, pressing a hand to her forehead. "It was a horrible thing." Nina's chest tightened. Mrs. Langford opened her eyes, looking at her with something like pity. You survived, Nina. Nina's breath stilled. Her voice felt small when she spoke. And Elise didn't. Mrs. Langford gave a slow, sad nod. Nina swallowed against the lump forming in her throat. Why don't I remember her? The older woman hesitated, then shook her head. Your father. Nina's hands clenched. What about him? Mrs. Langford's expression hardened, a rare moment of bitterness flickering across her usually kind face. He didn't want you to remember. He made sure you didn't. The words landed like a stone in Nina's stomach. He forced your mother to pretend Elise never existed. He thought it was the only way for you to move on. He thought if he erased her, if no one spoke about her, if there were no pictures, no reminders, you would never feel the loss. Nina's head spun. She felt sick. She tried to grasp onto something, anything, that made sense, but the ground beneath her had fallen away. She had a twin. She had a sister. And her father had erased her. Her voice trembled. But I did feel it. Mrs. Langford's face softened. Nina pressed a hand to her forehead, inhaling shakily. That ache she had always carried, the feeling that something was missing, the nightmares, the hollow spaces in her childhood, they hadn't been nothing. She hadn't been imagining it. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she forced herself to say the words out loud. But Elise is back now. Mrs. Langford's expression flickered with something Nina couldn't quite name, fear, maybe, or something dangerously close to belief. Nina didn't wait for confirmation. She already knew the answer. Nina sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her trembling hands. The weight of the night pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was waiting. Her mind felt like it had been thrown into a storm, past and present crashing together in a way that didn't make sense. Her sister. Elise. The name felt like a ghost itself, haunting the edges of her memory, filling the gaps she hadn't known were there. She had a twin. She had a twin. And she had forgotten her. Nina squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her fingers into her temples. The images were scattered, flashes of something she couldn't quite reach, small hands pulling her forward, laughter echoing through a bright summer day, a feeling of warmth, of belonging. And then, nothing. Gone. Erased. She opened her eyes and looked up. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror across the room. Nina inhaled sharply. Her fingers curled into the blankets beneath her. Something wasn't right. Her reflection stood perfectly still, but not in the way a normal reflection should. The face was hers, the body was hers, but it wasn't moving the way it was supposed to. Nina swallowed, her pulse thrumming. Then, slowly, the reflection smiled. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't smiled. But Elise had. A cold sweat broke out across Nina's skin, her limbs frozen in place as her twin, her ghost, tilted her head to the side, her eyes dark and unreadable. You forgot me. Nina flinched at the sound. It was her voice, but it wasn't hers at all. The edges of it were wrong, too soft, too distant, like a whisper coming from somewhere deep underwater. You forgot my life. Nina's fingers clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. Elisa's gaze bore into her, unblinking. So I took my rightful place. The words wrapped around Nina's lungs, squeezed the air from them. A movement. A flicker. The mirror fogged, as if a breath had passed against it. Nina bolted from the bed. Iris. She ran. The hallway was dark, the walls stretching too long, the air suddenly thick, pressing down on her. Her foot caught on the rug, sending her stumbling forward. She caught herself on the doorframe, gripping it so hard her knuckles ached. She pushed Iris's bedroom door open. The soft yellow light from the night lamp bathed the room in a warm glow. The faint scent of lavender shampoo and fabric softener clung to the air. Iris was sitting up in bed, small and quiet, her stuffed bunny clutched in one hand. And Elise was sitting beside her. Nina's stomach dropped. Iris wasn't afraid. She wasn't crying, wasn't pulling away. She was holding Elise's hand. Nina's breath came in short, ragged bursts. Her legs felt weak, barely able to hold her up. Iris turned to her, wide-eyed and calm. She wants to stay, Mommy. Nina's entire body locked up. Her pulse pounded so loudly she thought the walls might shake with it. She forced herself to look. Elise was staring back at her, still and quiet, the same way she had been in the mirror. The same face. The same eyes. The same person. But not alive. Nina's knees hit the floor before she even realized she had collapsed. Her hands clutched the sheets, gripping the fabric as if it could keep her tethered to something real, something that made sense. Her throat was tight, her chest heaving. Her voice barely came out. "I'm so sorry." The words broke from her like a dam cracking, like a flood that had been held back for too long. She didn't know what she was apologizing for, forgetting, living, breathing when Elise couldn't. Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. Elise didn't move. Didn't speak. But for the first time, her expression changed. And Nina could have sworn she saw something close to sadness flicker in her twin's eyes. Nina sat cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom, the shoebox resting in front of her, its contents scattered across the carpet. The room was dimly lit, the bedside lamp casting soft, flickering shadows across the walls. The house was silent, but it no longer felt suffocating. She picked up an old birthday card, its edges curled with time, the handwriting inside smudged and faded. She recognized her mother's cursive, the way she had written Nina's name with such care. But there was something else, something that made Nina's fingers tighten around the fragile paper. "Happy birthday, my sweet girls." Girls. She exhaled shakily and set the card aside, reaching for the next item, a crumpled Polaroid of two little girls sitting side by side on a picnic blanket, identical except for the color of their shoes. Nina in red sneakers. Elise in blue. Her stomach twisted. The memories weren't coming back fully, but they were there. Small flashes, like distant echoes she could almost hear. A laugh, a voice calling her name, the feeling of someone always by her side. The weight of something lost, something stolen from her. Elise hadn't come back to hurt her. She had come back because Nina had forgotten her. Nina ran a hand through her hair, letting the realization settle deep into her bones. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't bring Elise back. But she could acknowledge her. She shifted through the box, searching for something, anything, that still belonged to both of them. Then her fingers brushed against soft fabric. She stilled. Buried beneath layers of old papers and broken crayons was a small rag doll. Nina pulled it out slowly, the weight of it sending a sharp pang through her chest. Rosie. The stitches on one arm were coming undone, her yarn hair tangled, the faded blue button eyes looking up at her as if they had been waiting. A memory flickered in her mind, two sets of hands, tugging back and forth, arguing over who got to hold her. "She's mine tonight, Nina." "No, mine. You had her last time." Giggles, a soft compromise, small arms wrapping around each other as they drifted off to sleep, the doll nestled between them. Nina's breath hitched. She had forgotten. But Elise hadn't. Her hands trembled as she traced the doll's familiar shape, the tiny dress her mother had sewn, the worn edges from too many nights of being loved. She stood, holding Rosie against her chest as she walked to the fireplace. The mantel was bare, empty except for an old photo frame and a candle that had burned down to its last inch of wax. Carefully, she placed the doll in the center. It wasn't much. But it was something. She stepped back, staring at the small, tattered doll sitting in its place. The air in the house felt different, lighter, like something unseen had settled. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, Nina didn't check the security cameras. She didn't keep the lights on. She didn't sit awake in fear. She tucked Iris in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Sleep tight, baby." Then she crawled into bed, exhaling as she let sleep take her. She didn't dream of shadows. She didn't dream of dark hallways or mirrors that moved on their own. Instead, she dreamed of a field, golden and warm, the sound of laughter echoing through the air. And when she opened her eyes, she felt at peace. The house was quiet. Not the kind of eerie silence that had haunted her before, but something softer. Something whole. She stretched, glancing toward the doorway. The sun was rising, spilling golden light through the thin curtains. She walked into the kitchen, still adjusting to the strange calm inside her chest. Iris was already at the table, swinging her little legs back and forth as she poked at her cereal. Nina set a glass of juice in front of her, ruffling her hair gently. Iris looked up at her, blinking sleepily. "She's happy now, Mommy." Nina's breath caught. Iris took another bite of cereal, completely unbothered, like she was saying something as casual as "It's going to rain today." Nina swallowed. "Who, baby?" Iris licked a bit of milk from her lip, then pointed toward the living room. Nina turned her head slowly. The doll sat on the mantel, right where she had left it. Iris smiled, resting her chin in her palm. She said thank you. Nina's chest tightened, something warm flooding through her. She glanced at the doll again, the small, tattered thing that had once belonged to both of them. And for the first time in a long, long time, she breathed. The cemetery stretched before Nina in quiet rows of stone, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The sky was overcast, gray clouds rolling lazily overhead, casting everything in muted light. It had been years since she had last come here, and yet the moment her feet touched the gravel path, she felt the weight of it settle into her bones. She clutched the 2 white roses in her hands, their petals soft against her fingers. The cold breeze nipped at her cheeks as she walked, her steps slow but steady. Her mother's grave was exactly where she remembered it, tucked beneath the shadow of an old oak tree, its branches swaying gently above like it was keeping watch. The headstone was simple, the inscription still sharp despite the passing years. Sylvia Harding. Beloved Mother. Nina exhaled shakily, kneeling down and brushing away the stray leaves that had gathered around the base. "Hey, Mom," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers tightened around the first rose. She placed it carefully against the stone, smoothing out the petals. "For me," she said softly. Then she lifted the second. She hesitated, her chest tightening. She had spent her whole life not knowing this name, not remembering that there had ever been someone else. But now she knew. And knowing meant she could never go back. She placed the second rose beside the first. "For Elise." The moment the words left her lips, something inside her settled. It wasn't a grand moment. There was no sudden warmth, no voice whispering back to her from the beyond. But something in the air shifted, just slightly, like the wind had softened, like the world had taken a deep breath with her. She let her fingers rest on the cold stone for a moment longer, then pushed herself to her feet. She didn't say goodbye. She just turned and walked away. The drive to her father's house was quiet, the low hum of the engine filling the space where her thoughts should have been. She gripped the steering wheel, watching familiar landmarks pass by, the old diner, the library on the corner, the gas station where she had bought her first candy bar with her own pocket change. And then, there it was. The house she had grown up in. It looked smaller than she remembered, though time had a way of shrinking things. The white paint on the porch railing was peeling, the mailbox still tilting slightly to one side. The curtains in the front window were drawn, but a faint glow inside told her he was home. She killed the engine, staring at the front door. She hadn't been here in years. And yet, here she was. She stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel driveway, and walked up the steps before she could change her mind. Her knuckles rapped against the door, 3 sharp knocks. A long pause. Then, the sound of slow, hesitant footsteps. The door opened. Her father stood before her, older, more tired than she remembered. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, the lines on his face deeper, carved by years of silence. He blinked at her, surprised, before his face settled into something unreadable. "Nina," he said, his voice rough, aged. She swallowed. "I remember now," she said simply. His body tensed. She didn't wait for him to answer. "I know about Elise. I know what you did. I know why." He let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging. "Nina." "I'm not here to argue," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not here to be angry." He looked at her carefully, his lips pressing into a thin line. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to steady. "I just needed you to know that I remember." A long silence stretched between them. His eyes dropped slightly, as if the weight of her words had hit him somewhere deep. He nodded once, slowly, but said nothing. Nina studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I forgive you," she said, her voice quieter now. His head snapped up, surprise flashing across his features. "But I won't forget." Her father swallowed, nodding again, though this time, his expression was something closer to understanding. She turned before he could say anything else, walking back down the steps, back to her car. She didn't look back. At home, the afternoon light poured through the windows, casting a warm glow across the living room. Iris sat on the floor with her crayons, her little fingers moving quickly across the paper, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Nina set down her keys, shaking off the weight of the day, and walked over. "What are you making, baby?" she asked, kneeling beside her. Iris grinned and lifted the paper. Nina's breath caught in her throat. It was a picture of 2 identical women standing on either side of Iris, each holding one of her hands. Nina's fingers curled around the edge of the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. Iris tilted her head, smiling. "She said she'll always watch over us." Nina's gaze flickered toward the mantel, toward the small, worn doll that sat there, exactly where she had placed it. A shiver ran down her spine, but it wasn't fear. Iris giggled, returning to her drawing, completely at ease. Nina exhaled slowly. She shivered. And then, she smiled, too.